Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you for taking time out of your busy day to come here. I do appreciate it. I'm going to start with my home thoughts. I'm still stuck on Rainer Maria Rilke, who's this wonderful poet, terribly intense, Keatsian in many ways. And I like this comment: I live not in dreams, but in contemplation of a reality that is perhaps the future. I think that's fantastic. My mind went back to Lake Magadi, where I haven't been in a while, and it really is a wonderfully beautiful place, a little bit remote, and I told you what happened last time, which put us off a little, but it's about 110 kilometers from Nairobi. I'll put up an image of it as you approach it, and then two other pictures, one of the birds on that lake, and finally one of the hot springs. And those hot springs are meant to be very therapeutic and very alkaline. It's actually quite marvelous, and I did feel a lot better after the Maasai told me that this was a natural health product of all of its own. Copeland's goal is to become the first African-American principal dancer with the ABT, and I just like the image, so I'll put that up. Political reflections: the US has carried out its first airstrike against the Islamic State. We learned that overnight. Let's see how that plays out, because bear in mind the backers of the Islamic State are very strong US allies. Russia freezes Ukraine into submission. Kiev admits country doesn't have enough fuel for the winter. The Ukrainian government admits that it does not have enough fuel to heat homes and keep factories running through the winter. And the crisis comes with an economy already in meltdown. It was expected to contract by 7%, but Valeria Gontareva, head of the National Bank of Ukraine, warned at the weekend that the real figure is likely to be 10%. Exports to Russia, a key market, will fall by 35%, she added. Meanwhile, the currency, the hryvnia, has depreciated by 50% against the dollar in the past 9 months. After Russia cut off gas supplies to Ukraine in a dispute over unpaid bills, Kiev sought to replace the shortfall through reverse flows, taking Russian gas from countries such as Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia. But Gazprom, Russia's state gas company, has complained over the practice, denouncing it as a semi-fraudulent mechanism, and threatened to reduce exports to these states so that none is left to send on to Ukraine. Speaking at the Yalta International Conference held in Kiev this year after the annexation of Crimea by the Kremlin, Ukraine's energy minister Yuri Prodan accused Russia of blatantly using gas as a political tool. Surprise, surprise, wouldn't you? To survive the winter, he added, rather unpopular measures, including administrative ones aimed at reducing energy consumption, will have to be taken. My conclusions are that this was entirely predictable. As I mentioned previously, I feel Putin is a sideshow in some respects to the main play, which is the pivot to Asia. And essentially propelling him into Xi Jinping's embrace was short-sighted, because it effectively created a triangulation, a self-triangulation for President Obama. I saw this photograph on Al Jazeera late last night of the US Secretary of State John Kerry on the right shaking hands with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Paris. This was on Monday, and I thought that was an interesting signal, and it might be an important one. Let's keep an eye on it. Narishkin was quoted as saying by Interfax, the cynical and irresponsible policy of the United States and those countries that are on its leash is pushing the world to the verge of a new Cold War. The US has told Assad to beware of interfering with US air power in Syria. The Syrian military's air defenses would face retaliation if Syria attempted to respond to US airstrikes that are expected against Islamic State targets in Syria, a senior US official said on Monday. President Obama's authorization of the use of American air power against Islamic State strongholds in Syria has raised the question of whether Syrian President Assad would respond in some way. And essentially, I call that the redirection risk, and that's very, very high for President Assad. And that took me back to a piece I wrote on the 25th of August 2014. I said, picking up the signal through the noise of our world in 2014 is no easy thing. In fact, my view is the new normal is a very arrhythmic world. When I plugged arrhythmia into my computer, it threw this up. For years, we've been studying the phenomenon of chaos, of which an arrhythmic heartbeat was a perfect example. It was His Excellency Johann Borgstein who told me that the signal announcing this new arrhythmic normal was the disappearance of the MH370. Since then, planes have been falling out of the sky like flies, and the uncertainty around MH370 and MH17 is sharpened by the way the story is seemingly turned on and off. That took me back to Don DeLillo, who said, we are witnessing the flow of information. We are not witnessing the flow of information so much as pure spectacle, or information made sacred, ritually unreadable. The small monitors of the office, home and car become a kind of idolatry here, where crowds might gather in astonishment. Then I jumped to the Ebola virus, and this is in August, I was saying it continues to gain velocity, and the World Health Organization in their latest release dated August 22nd announced that the magnitude of the Ebola outbreak has been underestimated, and of the existence of an invisible caseload of patients who are not being detected by the surveillance system, who spoke of the existence of numerous shadow zones. NATO spoke of a new characterization of warfare called ambiguous warfare. And I was saying, Eastern Ukraine has become a shadow zone. And I was asking, now given this new level of arrhythmia, friction, and a kind of unsettling ambiguity, how are we to navigate the financial markets? And I concluded by saying that in the old days, these conditions would have created a flight into the dollar. And interestingly, the dollar has been punching higher. And I said on the 25th of August, if things tip big, the dollar might soar. And I'll put up an image of what is now the constant struggle to filter out the noise and find the signal. The Libyan Prime Minister Abdullah Al-Tini said on Sunday Qatar had sent 3 military planes loaded with weapons to a Tripoli airport controlled by an armed opposition group. Unfortunately, the planes reached Matiga Airport. We will consider breaking off relations if this interference into Libya's internal affairs continued. We confirmed that we have official reports that these warplanes carried weapons and ammunition, he said. What does Qatar want to give to the Libyan people? And you'll remember that piece I wrote on the 4th of October 2011, Gaddafi's body in a freezer. What's the message? Do go and read that again. I'll put up a photograph of Gaddafi dead. Currency markets, Euro 129.42, dollar index 84.23. I spoke initially about this resistance level here. Japanese yen 107.16, touched 107.39 on September 12th, which was the highest level since September 2008 for the dollar. Swiss franc 0.9347, pound 162.22. I think it's a little bit oversold. The Aussie trying to keep its head above 0.9000. Traded 0.8984 yesterday, which was the lowest since March. India rupee 61.09, but some respite surely coming from the weaker price of oil. South Korean won 10.35.15, Rial 2.34.26, Egyptian pound 7.15.14, and the South African rand back below 11 at 10.96.37. The dollar has risen 3.5% in the past month and is the best performer among 10 developed nation currencies tracked by Bloomberg. Yen is down 1.8% and the euro has lost 0.5%. I'll put up a 1-month chart of sterling and I think it's oversold, but obviously we're now on a knife edge depending upon where that vote goes. It's deeply oversold. if the no vote wins. Dollar index, I think, is headed a lot higher. It's at 84.23 last. I think we're in a pause for breath before we resume a move higher. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is a fraction below July 2013 high. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that, trying to find some support around this sort of area. China August FDI falls to the lowest in at least 2.5 years, attracted $7.2 billion in FDI in August, the Commerce Ministry said on Tuesday, down 14% from a year earlier, a level not seen since February 2012. Commodity markets, gold is at 1236.85. My target was 1240, so I'm on the sidelines now thinking about what it's going to do next. Crude oil, $91.87. It's trying to base out, but key chart support is actually at $88 in point of fact. Brent crude declined to the lowest level in more than 2 years yesterday on concerns slower economic growth in China will reduce demand. Iran was the best performing stock market in the world in 2013, up 130%. And this is from Beyond Bricks. Trades at a price earnings ratio of 6, 17% dividend yield. By comparison, the MSCI Frontier Markets Index trades at a PE of 12.4 with a 3.7% dividend yield. If the rapprochement between President Obama and Hassan Rouhani, and it's still got a long way to go, gains traction and velocity, the stock market is obviously going to explode higher. But, we're talking about a losing sequence in US-Iran relations that goes all the way back to the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Barack Hussein Obama and Hassan Rouhani are going to have to cut through a great deal of interference. In this situation, they remain powerful vested interests, fully invested in the status quo. I'll put up a photograph of President Rouhani that I like getting off his plane. Out of jail, back in the Dubai property game. This is a great article in Business Week. Dubai's boom and bust real estate market can land you behind bars or behind the wheel of a luxury sedan. 5 years after spending 140 days in jail, Kabir Mulchandani drives a black Rolls-Royce to a building site to watch cranes work on one of his company's 3 projects, which will have a combined value of about $1.6 billion when completed. I guess the beauty of life is its uncertainty, says Mulchandani. I went from making corporate deals, hanging out on a yacht, and living in Emirates Hills to sharing a jail cell with 8 others. I think it speaks to the phenomenal rebound that we've had in Dubai. I'll put up a photograph of the Burj Khalifa I took 150 days ago. And I wrote a piece in February where I said, Dubai has made itself an intersection point in this 21st century world. I'll put up a photograph of Dubai from the sky 206 days ago. Dubai is the real transit state, a connection point in an interconnected century, and I stand by that. Globally fluent. Global fluency is a level of understanding, competence, practice, and reach a metropolitan area exhibits in an increasingly interconnected world economy. And Dubai is the preeminent example of that. I'll put up a photograph of Dubai in 1980. Coming to Africa, President Obama is to announce an Ebola force of 3,000 US military personnel. And again, this dovetails neatly into the US AFRICOM agenda, does it not? I'm surprised that no one's commenting on that yet, but I'm sure they will. Administration officials said on Monday that the new initiatives aim to train as many as 500 healthcare workers a week, erect 17 healthcare facilities in the region of 100 beds each, set up a joint command headquartered in Monrovia to coordinate between US and international relief efforts, provide some healthcare kits to hundreds of thousands of households, including 50,000 that the US Agency for International Development will deliver to Liberia this week, and carry out a home and community-based campaign to train local populations on how to handle exposed patients. Now, jumping from there to an article in Wired.com, the mathematics of Ebola triggers stark warnings, act now or regret it. The Ebola epidemic has continued to expand. It's accounted for 4,200 cases, 2,200 deaths in 5 countries. This is extraordinary. Since the virus was discovered, no Ebola outbreak's toll has risen above several hundred cases. This is now truly a type of epidemic that the world has never seen before. In light of that, several articles were published recently that are very worth reading. The most arresting is a piece published last week in the journal Eurosurveillance, which is a publication of the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control. This piece is an attempt to assess mathematically how the epidemic is growing by using case reports to determine the reproductive number. The basic reproductive number, usually shortened to R0 or R0, expresses how many cases of disease are likely to be caused by any one infected person. And R0 less than 1 means an outbreak will die out, and R0 more than 1 means an outbreak can be expected to increase. The Eurosurveillance paper attempts to derive what the reproductive rate has been in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. They came up with an R of at least 1 and in some cases 2. That is, at certain points, sick persons have caused disease in 2 others. You can see how that would quickly get out of hand, and in fact, this is what researchers predict. In a worst-case hypothetical scenario, should the outbreak continue with recent trends, the case burden could gain an additional 77,181 to 277,124 cases by the end of 2014. I still think this is being underplayed. They're talking about, the first possibility is that the virus spreads from West Africa to megacities in other regions of the developing world. Second possibility is one that virologists are loath to discuss openly, but are definitely considering in private, that an Ebola virus could mutate to become transmissible through the air. Viruses like Ebola are notoriously sloppy in replicating, meaning the virus entering one person may be genetically different from the virus entering the next. The current Ebola virus's hyper-evolution is unprecedented. There have been more human-to-human transmission in the past 4 months than most likely occurred in the last 500 to 1,000 years. Each new infection represents trillions of throws of genetic dice. Like Besser, Osterholm says that the speed, size, and organization of the response that is needed demands a governmental investment, but that looks beyond the US government alone. We need someone to take over the position of command and control. On the 18th of August, I mentioned that viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics, and I was referring, in essence, to what Wired have now come back with. I participated in an Al Jazeera Inside Story where I talked about these very points. Now coming to the markets, you will remember on the 20th of June I predicted that African markets would rally and make it a 3-year bull phenomenon, and I'm standing by that. South African all-share ticked higher 0.25%. It's up 11.0688% this year. Johannesburg listed shares of SAB Miller ended up almost 10%. That was after a media report that larger rival Anheuser-Busch InBev is lined up financing for a possible $122 billion takeover bid. Dollar Rand has crept back below 11. I'll put up a chart there, you can have a look at it, but we're weak here and looking soft, but that's typical in an environment where the dollar's getting stronger. The Rand tends to be a sort of risk proxy. Egyptian pound 715.10, Egyptian stock market up 39.28% this year, multi-year highs. Nigerian all share is at 14-week lows, but ticked up 0.24% yesterday. The all share is down 1.354% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange is at 4-week highs and is up 4.4775%. Sentiment is improving around Ghana post the $1 billion Eurobond and the IMF program. The Central Bank of Kenya is saying sanctions to South Sudan could expose Kenyan banks to risks. Policymakers should pay attention to any additional punitive litigations against financial institutions, the central bank said. The Qatar National Bank has acquired a further 11% stake in Ecobank Transnational, that takes their holding in the bank to 23.5% and ahead of I think it's Nedbank who have a stake in the bank as well. Implementation of the Customs Union Protocol has had a positive impact on intra-East African community trade, which has grown from $2 billion in 2005 to $5.5 billion in 2013. Russia, Zimbabwe to develop nation's biggest platinum mine. Russia and Zimbabwe will jointly mine platinum in the African country's Darwin-Dale district. Russian Trade Minister Denis Manturov and Zimbabwean Foreign Minister Sembarashe Bubengegwe said in a joint statement, "The priority for us is the Darwin-Dale Platinum Project." That's an interesting development, is it not? The venture will be officially open tomorrow, with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov expected to officiate. So Russia would also likely supply military hardware, helicopters and trucks to Zimbabwe, Manturov told reporters. And then interestingly, Zimbabwe has cut the royalty imposed on gold producers to 5% from 7% to boost production. Coming to Kenya, President Kenyatta approved a 5% capital gains tax, and this will affect investment in property, equities and oil and gas. Finance bill approved by Parliament in late August will take effect on January 1st. Plans for capital gains tax were first announced in June 2013's budget. This is something that the IMF have been pushing for a while. It will have an effect, especially on equities and fixed income. Paying taxes is not something people enjoy doing. It complicates a lot of things. I would say yes. It would really affect how foreign investors view the market. This is a senior fixed income analyst at one investment bank. I said, I think given the fact that it is optically such a low number and it keeps Kenya at the bottom of the capital gains tax matrix in Africa, I think we'll look through this and move on. If they're thinking of putting it higher, then I think we're in a little different situation, I said. The Kenya shilling is trading a fresh 31-month low at 89. Of course, with that a rampant dollar, you'd expect it to be soft. The Nairobi All-Share reached a new record high yesterday. It's up 17.614% year to date. It rallied 0.81% yesterday. The NSE 20, which is up 5.2168%, closed at a more than 60-month high yesterday as well. I wrote that piece over the weekend about the self-listing and the coming of age of the Nairobi Securities Exchange. Do have a look at that. I was talking about the ownership society, Mrs. Thatcher, and how I thought, the Kenyan politician, the government here would do well to expand the ownership society and make sure everyone's got a profit. And I think, that tribe of 2 million shareholders can tip the balance one way or the other. If you haven't seen the speech made by the CEO, Peter Mwangi, or the Cabinet Secretary Aidan Mohammed on the occasion of the listing of these shares, that link is on Rich Wrap-Ups. I'll put up a photograph of Aidan ringing the bell. The Nairobi Securities Exchange has exploded 144.73% higher through this morning, and it's higher still today. I said to Katrina, it's a very small, bite-sized IPO, price to clear, which is why we've had a nice pop and people got behind it, and I think that's what happened. Equity Bank closed at a record yesterday. It's up 70.73% this year. I'll put up a photograph of Dr. Mwangi from last week when I was at the Kenya-Nigeria Agribusiness Forum. Kenya Commercial Bank has matched a record high yesterday of 58.50. That was previously reached on the 3rd of September. It's now up 23.0895% year to date. Centum closed at a fresh record yesterday, 60.50. That's plus 83.333% year to date. Britam is plus 94.719% year to date and at a record. Kenya Orchards, the best performing share at the Nairobi Securities Exchange, has posted a rally over 1,050%. And then finally, EABL popped 1.81% high yesterday on the SAB Miller Heineken News. The stock market, of course, is at a record. I think it's third. Dar es Salaam is top up about 71% this year. Second is Egypt, and then Kenya, I believe, ranks third. I remain bullish, and I think conditions are supportive, and that's why I said at the beginning of the year I thought we'd have a 3-year bull phenomenon across Africa. Once again, thank you for stopping by.